2021. During those same years, Saudi Arabia and UAE waged a brutal war in Yemen, leading to over 150,000 deaths. In 2018, a bomb manufactured by Lockheed Martin, sold to the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, by the United States, was dropped on a school bus traveling through a crowded market in Yemen, killing 40 children and 11 adults. Just north of Saudi Arabia, the U.S. government is formally committed to sending no less than $3.8 billion in military aid to Israel each and every year. Imagine how many Palestinian lives could be spared if all of us, organized as a class, stood up and refused to allow billions of dollars to be sent to an apartheid regime responsible for the suffering of so many families and communities. And this isn't just recent history. The United States has been doing this since its beginning. Since 1945, the United States military, or CIA, has intervened in over 50 different sovereign nations around the globe, disseminating propaganda, training fascist paramilitary death squads, toppling governments, and installing client states. The list of countries includes China, Italy, Greece, Iran, Indonesia, Vietnam, Haiti, Guatemala, Cuba, Ghana, Angola, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, Ukraine, and so many more. Even the U.S.'s closest allies have experienced the treacherous nature of its imperialist agenda. In 1975, the legally elected Prime Minister of Australia's first Labour government in 23 years was dismissed from political office, the culmination of a vast conspiracy led by elements from within the Australian military-industrial complex and under direction of the CIA. A true understanding of the nature of U.S. imperialism is critical in the struggle against it. Why would the CIA carry out a regime change in Australia in 1975? Well, why did the U.S. force regime change in Ukraine in 2014, in Iraq in 2003, or Iran in 1953? The answer lies in the Australian Prime Minister's unwillingness to continue supporting the United States in its disastrous war against the People's Liberation Armed Forces of Vietnam. The true rulers of U.S. empire, the capitalist class, the owners of industry, adhere to a doctrine of great power politics. That's the game they play. They see international politics and the development of nations as a zero-sum game. For the United States to maintain its economic hegemony and military dominance, all other nations must be under its heel. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, capitalists wanted nothing less than unlimited access to the new Russian state's resources and labor markets. The incremental expansion of NATO, a geopolitical tool of the United States and its most powerful allies, has been used as an overt act of aggression against Russia and its sovereignty and security for the past 3 decades. The very establishment of NATO is steeped in fascist anti-communism. After World War II, NATO was created in the interest of collaboration between liberal capitalism and fascism against the international socialist movement. Look at its leaders. Adolf Heusinger, a former operations chief within high command of the Nazi war machines, served as the first chair of NATO's military committee in 1963. NATO's actions have always been an aggressive force, never a defensive alliance. We are calling for peace in Ukraine now. We demand the capitalist ruling elite put a stop to their funding and escalation of this war, and we demand they put a stop to their involvement in all wars and conflicts around the world. The billionaire class in control of our government doesn't care about the Ukrainian people. It never cared about the Ukrainian people. The ruling elite is using this war as a proxy conflict with Russia. The blood of thousands of Russian and Ukrainian workers are on their hands, as is the blood of Che Guevara, Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, Salvador Allende, and the blood of Fred Hampton, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King. The struggle of Ukrainian workers for their right of self-determination isn't a struggle that they must endure alone. The imperialism that seeks to oppress them is the same imperialism that commits genocide against indigenous nations right here in the United States, right here in Kentucky. It's the same imperialism that continues to disenfranchise the people of Haiti. It's the same imperialism that tore Africans from their homes, bound them in chains, and built generational wealth using their slave labor. It's the same imperialism that can destroy the lives of veterans of these wars and threaten the lives of those who struggle for liberation. These struggles are all interconnected. And if any of us want to achieve liberation for our people, we have to fight for the liberation of all people. Let's not forget who always ends up being sent to every corner of the earth to fight and die for the rich. In every war the U.S. empire has waged, it's been the enslaved and the working class who's gone to die for the rich's interests. In the 60s and 70s, my mom's father and uncles were taken from their homes and forced to participate in the illegal invasion of Vietnam. When they came home, my grandfather and his brothers were abandoned by the institutions they served. The trauma they experienced and the resulting substance abuse issues they faced robbed my mom of the healthy and safe childhood she deserved. In the 90s and 2000s, it was my father's uncles who were sold the false ticket of upward mobility by signing a contract with the U.S. military. When they returned, the toxic culture they had been immersed in during their service alienated my dad from his family, creating divisions that kept me from really connecting with my family throughout my childhood. Decade after decade, it has been my family, our families, who've been coerced by the propaganda effort, failed by our school systems, or drafted into being the pawns of a murderous United States imperialist agenda. And that ain't right. We are here. We are here to call upon all members of the working class and all working class organizations of Louisville to join us in the struggle for peace against the most deadly force in the history of the world, the United States war machine. As the crises of capitalism escalate, the ruling class will continue to use jingoism and war as a way to stave off their inevitable reckoning at home by redirecting potentially revolutionary energy towards senseless conflicts abroad. A month and a half ago, a letter was written to U.S. Air Force leadership by a 4-star general predicting a war against China in the next 2 years. In 2 years, they want us to fight a war with China. Hell no. And that's why we must prepare to organize as a revolutionary anti-war movement and take the streets and march in numbers greater than ever before. As socialists, as workers, as tenants, it is essential that we speak out against this war before it escalates any further. The U.S. ruling class holds the constant threat of nuclear war over our heads and the heads of all people of the world. Our only hope of stopping the eventual destruction of all life on this planet is through socialist revolution here in the United States. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Steve Gardner with Veterans for Peace. He's been a comrade in this struggle a lot longer than I have. He has great words of wisdom. Please listen to them.
Hey, y'all. Thank you for inviting me to speak. Stephen Gardner, president of local chapter 168 of Veterans for Peace here in Louisville. I've been doing this a long time. I've been involved in struggles for justice, struggles for crushing hierarchies, anti-racist struggles, anti-sexist struggles, anti-queer struggles since the late 1980s, shortly after I got out of the imperial American war machine, where I was a nuclear soldier. I was one of those guys who stood around waiting to press a button to end the world. That's what I did. I'm not proud of it, but from it I did learn some lessons. One of which is that any one of us has a certain amount of power that is not very much. Coming together is absolutely essential. So the first question I want to ask you is, what time do you think it is on the clock of the world? How much time do we have left? I don't mean it as a rhetorical question, because from my point of view, and besides being with Veterans for Peace. My day job is I work for a justice-oriented think tank called Local Research Associates. And I think about this all the time. And I talk to people who are thinking about it. We're at the nexus of two crises. The first is the crises of neoliberal capitalism, which when I say neoliberal, I don't mean to soften that and say not capitalism. I mean a particularly rapacious form of capitalism. It doesn't even believe that it has to give a pittance to help justify its own existence. Particular form of capitalism that is reaching a point of non-sustainability through its own investment in austerity and basically screwing over ordinary people in favor of the transfer of wealth from most of us to a few of us. When I look at the 20-year history of the Iraq War, as well as the concurrent Afghanistan War, what I see is something really obvious. And it's wrong to think about it as a conspiracy, because this is what fucking rich people do. They use their wealth and power to keep their wealth and power forever and to throw it. And they feel if they can't make it more, they're losing. And they see us, everyone else, as the enemy, not as opponents. You know what the difference between an enemy and an opponent is? An opponent you can disagree with. You can say, we share the most basic values, but we agree about what should be done right now. An enemy, you give yourself permission to kill that fucker because he's coming for your family. That's how they see us. That's the first crisis. The second crisis is a generational struggle. Okay, so just to put this in perspective, they know they're a minority. So they've got to have a program that appeals to enough people to perpetuate themselves. If you're not going to pay for legitimation, like through a robust welfare state, for example, you got to pick some patrons, some people who will feel threatened based on their position in the society, based on what most people actually want if you poll them. If you ask them, they want housing as a human right. They want healthcare as a human right. They want real education as a human right. And lots of other things besides. You ask them that. And so if most people want that, how do you keep it from them? Well, you have to find some people who, because of their historical position in a white supremacist, hierarchically capitalist and settler colonialist society, are afraid that if they become an operational minority, not just a demographic minority, but a political minority, if that happens, the people who might take power will do to them what they did to every fucking one else. And they're scared, and maybe they should be scared. So this generational struggle, what is encompassing? Well, when I say what time is it in the clock of the world, I say their answer is they need increased electoral autocracy. They cannot even maintain the rapacious power they have without increasing the concentration of surveillance, security state, and other kinds of coercive mechanisms. This is not a conspiracy. This is what they say if you read their internal white papers. And the people who recognize this the most are deep into a decades-old political program to advance the idea that the problem with the United States is that it's not racist enough. It's not imperialist enough. It's not classist enough. It's not sexist enough. That's the problem. If we're just a little bit worse, it would be better somehow. I mean, it's a crazy logic, but it is exactly what they're saying. And they also say, when you listen to them, is we have to capture the institutions from the ordinary neoliberal imperialists and shift it over to outright fascists. Because the ordinary neoliberal capitalists are not scared enough yet. They're probably going to get there. but as of yet, they're not scared enough. So that's part of it. Electoral autocracy, that's something that's coming at us in the next few years. And we can talk about taking to the streets, do that. I've been there for decades, and I'll be there again. Take the barricades, yeah. But we also have to be thinking, who do we actually need to win this fight? Who do we need? Who is the we? Because it's just leftists in this country, and maybe some really principled progressives, and some of the most vulnerable communities, it's not enough. We've got to bring some more people along with us. And the way to do that is through one-on-one outreach. And here's a secret: the scarier people get, the more likely they are. And this is, I'm a research scientist by training. The scarier people get, the more likely they are to reach for authoritarian solutions. So the point is not to scare them. The point is to inspire them. MLK used to say, from his tradition, which was a religious tradition, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. What I say, not my original thought, but what I repeat is, yeah, the arc of the moral universe bends towards those that pull the fucking hardest. One last thing in terms of the clock of the world. Besides electoral autocracy now, we're in a generational struggle to think about what kind of society we actually want to live in. We may not get there, and I'll just say, we're not going to get there in 6 months or 2 years or 5 years. Hell, the most reactionary forces in this country have got to where they are now after a 50-year struggle. And the neoliberal forces that are still in control, even as it heads towards catastrophe, have been building this sense between world wars. So we should not think that we can do it quicker than they can. We've got to win in the short run, but we also have to be looking towards our kids and our grandkids and bringing people along. I'm an old guy, I'm not going to be here that much longer, but we need to bring people along, or yeah, we're doing nothing. So the other issue then in that generational struggle is that huge thing is coming at us. It's like in a run over, it's like a bulldozer, is that as the status quo powers are challenged from the right, from their own reactionary front, they're going to move from things like climate denial to climate nationalism and resource imperialism. And this is going to drive another round of wars to capture resources and to keep people out and to control populations. Much of the thinking that is coming out of right-wing think tanks at this point is all about thinking about demographics and who can be allowed to be a real person in this society. And in other words, it's the same question that was being asked in 1845 and 1745 and 1963, 1968. Who can be a part of this society? Who counts? And I mean, I think we cannot allow the short-term capture of state power from the most reactionary forces to destroy any chance of a long-term. By this, I don't mean, oh, go vote Democrat. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we can think about more than one thing at the same time. All right, so thank you. I could, I'm a professor by training, to doctorate in this. Well, stop.
Give it up for Steve Gardner. Thank you so much. For a long time. You have a lot of wisdom. Next, we'll be hearing from Efnan Ismail with the Students for Justice in Palestine. She's a good comrade, a badass fucking organizer. Please welcome her to the stage.
My name is Akman. Yeah, I'm just going to be talking about how Palestine is kind of connected in the struggle. So if you want to see the effects of U.S. and British imperialism, you have to look no further than America and the genocide of indigenous people for over 500 years. You would see the statistics of murdered and missing indigenous women, and you would know that it's an epidemic in this country and in Canada. You would see that campaigns like ICW8 or the Indian Child Welfare Act of 1978 is a federal law that governs the removal and out-of-home placement of American Indian children, which is resurging into effect today. A forced assimilation of indigenous children that the U.S. is clearly not beyond reinstating, pushing boundaries of how to kill the indigenous spirit, trying to further extinguish indigenous culture and traditions by breaking up families and putting native children into non-native families. You would see that sovereign nations of indigenous people are having their sovereignty limited and their power cut shorter and shorter in the places they were promised to keep. You can take this knowledge of what Western imperialism does and see where else it has stuck its talents in. If you look over to Palestine, you can see the way Israel has learned from America and attempted to perfect their oppression of indigenous peoples. You would know that more Palestinians have died this year than there have been days in the year. Today's the 77th day of the year, and over 90 Palestinians have died this year. So far, you would know that homes are being demolished at an alarming rate, breaking up any sense of family normalcy, causing preventable houselessness and displacement. You would know that this is done because Israel accuses Palestinians of having insufficient permits to build their houses and businesses. Israel, an illegitimate settler colonial regime, questions the legitimacy of ownership. This includes homes built by the Jordanian government in the 60s and 70s, as is the case for the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in East Palestine, which had a lot of attention on it in 2021. And you'd know that the Jordanian government did this in order to help people after the Nakba, or the catastrophe of 1948, which dispossessed 750,000 Palestinians. Then the Nakba, or the setback of 1967, where Israel further dispossessed 300,000 Palestinians, including 130,000 who had already been displaced in 1948. You would see that Israel threatens Palestinians, forcing them to operate bulldozers to demolish their own homes. And if they refuse, they must pay a fine for Israeli offensive soldiers to do it for them, which is not much of a choice. One, you save money you don't have, and the other, you face humiliation and psychological warfare, bringing down the house that you've lived in your whole life. You would likely see the aggressive nature of Israeli offensive soldiers, provoking, threatening, and abusing children, detaining them as prisoners with as much hostile aggression as they can muster. Amr Mohammed Omar Awadin, a 16-year-old, was shot with live ammunition in the back by undercover Israeli special forces while he was riding his bike outside his parents' shop around 3 p.m. on March 16th in the northern occupied West Bank city of Jenin. He is the 17th child murdered by Israel this year so far. Israel has a legacy of over 70 years of inflicting torturous living conditions on Palestinians. This is no clearer than in Gaza, a densely populated area with 2 million Palestinians inside of 140 square kilometers. Israel monitors the daily caloric intake of the people by only permitting a certain amount of food in daily, just enough to prevent starvation. A senior Israeli official described Israel's planned response, saying, "The idea is to put the Palestinians on a diet, but not to make them die of hunger." That ain't right. Gazans only get 5 to 15 hours of electricity a day, so nothing stays refrigerated, from food to medicines, if they can even get their hands on it. Permits affect this situation as well. If a person from Gaza needs medical attention, no matter how immediately they need it, they have to apply for a permit to leave, because movement in the city is not done freely. Gaza is the biggest open-air prison in the world, blocked by land, air, and sea. Living here, people are unable to do just that. People die here. With constant unfounded reasons for continuous airstrikes and brutal aggression and surveillance, there's no living, just surviving. You would note, importantly, that this settler colonial project is funded by the U.S. government with $3.8 billion a year.
Hey, right?
That's over $10 million a day. We could end child hunger in America. We could end all the hunger in America. We could house folks. We already can. There's enough properties that are empty, more than there are homeless people, but we just choose not to do this. We could nurture our people and possibly others with this money, but instead, imperialism convinces us that we must perpetuate aggression, that there's always somewhere to colonize and dominate, that there are always people who must endure Western imperialism and oppression. This is so terribly untrue. We cannot look to our so-called leaders to rectify the situation, this genocide and apartheid, because they are the ones asking for it. Joe Biden has famously said, were there not an Israel, the United States would have to invent an Israel to protect her interests in the region. American leaders do not fund settler colonialism and war because it is in the best interest of any of the people that are affected by it, but because they can profit off of it and secure some status of superiority, which does not serve us nor protect us in any manner. It does not. It only serves to create tension and hatred between people, all of it manufactured and artificial. It does not serve us. Peace is the only way forward, and we must demand that America stop funding the genocide of the Palestinian people and destroy the idea in our minds that Palestinians are unjustified in fighting back against these aggressions and against such a heavily funded regime. When people are occupied, resistance by any means is justified.
Thank you for that, man. Those are some powerful words. Next, we'll be hearing from Emily Jackson, a good comrade from Lexington, speaking on behalf of United Campus Workers. Please welcome her to the stage.
Hi, my name is Emily, and I'm a member of United Campus Workers at the University of Kentucky. I'm a staff member in the chemistry department, and I've worked in public higher education for about 6 years. So I want to talk today about the ways that imperialism shapes the higher education system in this country to serve the war drive, and how that relates to the labor struggle of public higher education workers. For decades, we've been seeing the declining state funding of our public colleges and universities. And this is an urgent concern for higher ed workers who have experienced years of stagnant wages and layoffs. Some academic departments are struggling more than others, such as arts, and humanities, and social sciences, and smaller regional universities have been hit especially hard by state budget cuts. At my last workplace, Morehead State, even programs which train students for high demand careers like nursing and teaching are seriously struggling to hire and retain faculty due to the poor salaries that they offer. But what does this have to do with imperialism and war? In a capitalist education system like ours, academic programs which serve the interests of capitalists are the ones that get adequately funded. And so we see a lot more money being funneled into STEM fields, while things like arts and humanities, which may be deemed frivolous, are notoriously underfunded. However, that's not to say that the situation is really serving students with a passion for science and engineering either, because for those students, the paths available to them are still shaped by the interests of capital, of which a top priority is sustaining the military-industrial complex. For example, the Department of Defense is one of the largest sources of funding for research at American universities. Last year, the Pentagon invested over $130 billion into university research centers. So what does the national security state gain from these massive investments into public higher education? Agencies like the Departments of Defense and Homeland Security benefit from research developments that advance U.S. military and intelligence technology. This work, of course, is supported by the cheap labor of underpaid grad students and contingent faculty. They benefit further from gaining access to talented young people that they then recruit into their ranks. And they increase their ideological influence on campuses, further strengthening their propaganda efforts. In short, the imperialist state uses the education system as an instrument to perpetuate itself. During the Cold War, military funding paid for research programs, high-tech facilities, and new faculty hires at elite U.S. universities in an effort to bolster United States military dominance. And after 9/11, this relationship was reinvigorated, with the newly created Department of Homeland Security investing billions of dollars into universities for research and programming. And since the beginning of the so-called war on terror, The primary target for investment of defense funds has shifted from elite private universities to smaller state schools. Numerous research centers supported by funding from defense and intelligence agencies have been established on campuses at state universities around the country. And of course, as spending on higher education has declined throughout the same period, state universities have become more and more desperate for funding. So almost any new source of funds is an irresistible offer. And this symbiotic relationship between higher education and the US war machine is playing out here in Kentucky as well. The institution where I work, UK, was awarded 39 Department of Defense contracts between 2000 to 2020, worth over $16 million. And in 2021, received almost $24 million from the Department of Defense for a materials and processing technologies project. In the same year, UK administration made the decision to shut down the UK Confucius Institute, a program which provided Chinese language and culture education and facilitated cultural exchange between our two countries. Confucius Institutes around the world are supported by a foundation under the Chinese Ministry of Education. And in March 2021, the Senate passed a bill which prohibits universities from receiving certain federal funds if they host a Confucius Center on their campus. So when President Capilouto announced the closure of UK's Confucius Institute, he stated that UK has received $50 million over the last 5 years from Department of Defense funds, and that the university would not jeopardize its many proposed and active projects.
That ain't right.
And in the same statement, Capilouto praised the Institute for its positive impact and for the valuable educational opportunities it created, and admitted that the closure came amid a time of rising anti-Asian racism and violence. So even here in Kentucky, where we may be far removed from any active military conflict, we are close to the infrastructure of imperialism. And as the United States continues to gear up for major power conflict, as we see that it is doing, we should remember that. Given the position of higher education in the military-industrial complex, university workers and students have a unique opportunity to fight back against imperialism. Universities and colleges need our labor to operate. And when we are organized, we build the collective power that we need to fight and win changes in our workplace. As a worker in higher education, I have many reasons to oppose imperialism. War is disastrous for education systems, as are sanctions. And I have far more in common with my fellow workers in countries targeted by imperialism than I do with the capitalists of my own country.
Thank you so much, Emily, for sharing with us on education needs to be also anti-imperialist. Next, we'll be hearing from Sophia Harris. Yeah, come on up. Give her your attention, please.
I was trying to put my glasses on, Chair.
Hey everyone. Sorry I had to cut this a little short. Shout out to the old Louisville Coffee Co-op for hosting this anti-war rally. Actually on my way to Cincinnati, I just wanted to drop in for a minute. So check for a video here in a couple of hours. Heading up to Covington area for a big rally for Amazon unionizing, hosted by Workers Strike Back, Christian Smalls, and a lot of local unions up there. But being as anti-war as I am, I had to stop by here on the way out. So thanks for watching. Share this out, and hopefully I'll see you back online here in a few hours. Till then.